David, a kind-hearted bus driver barely making ends meet, thought he was doing the right thing when he stopped to help a lost, frightened child. But instead of being thanked for his compassion, he was fired from his job. With no warning and nowhere to turn, David felt as though his life was falling apart. Days later, just when he was beginning to lose hope, the governor's office called, bringing a twist that would change everything. Hi everyone, welcome to Mystic Tales. Today I'm excited to share a new story with you. David's life had always been predictable. Every day he woke up at dawn, drove the same bus route, greeted the same passengers, and went home exhausted. His paycheck was just enough to cover the bills, leaving little room for anything extra. Despite the hardships, David always tried to stay positive. His only motivation was providing for his family, his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young children. One chilly afternoon, David was on his usual route. The sky was gray, and a light drizzle began to fall. He noticed a young child, no more than 7 or 8 years old, standing alone at a bus stop. The boy was shivering, his face pale, and his eyes wide with fear. Something didn't feel right. David knew the regulars on his route, and this child was a stranger. The boy didn't board the bus like everyone else. Instead, he stood there, frozen in place. David hesitated for a moment. Glancing at the clock, he was already running a few minutes late, and his boss had been strict about staying on schedule. But something inside him wouldn't let him just drive away. He opened the door, leaned out, and called to the child. "Are you lost, buddy?" David asked gently, trying not to scare him. The boy nodded slowly, tears welling up in his eyes. David's heart sank. He looked around, hoping to spot a parent or someone who might be looking for the boy, but there was no one. David made a quick decision. He stepped off the bus, crouched down to the boy's level, and asked, "Where's your home? Do you know where you live?" The boy shook his head, his voice trembling as he whispered, "I can't find my mom." David knew he couldn't leave the child like this, even though he was breaking protocol. He guided the boy onto the bus and radioed his dispatcher to explain the situation. The response wasn't what he expected. His boss, Mr. Carter, was furious. "David, we've talked about this before. You can't get off schedule for any reason. You should have called the police. Now you're behind, and I'm getting complaints." David tried to defend himself, explaining that the child was scared and needed help, but his boss wasn't interested in excuses. He ordered David to finish his route immediately and deal with the situation afterward. David couldn't bring himself to abandon the boy. Instead, he finished his route as quickly as possible, then took the child to the nearest police station. It was only after the boy was safely in the hands of the authorities that David returned to the bus depot. He expected a warning, maybe a scolding, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. When David arrived back at the bus depot, he was immediately called into his boss's office. Mr. Carter sat behind his desk, a frown etched deeply across his face. "David, what you did today was unacceptable. You went off schedule, ignored direct orders, and now I'm getting complaints from passengers. This can't happen in this line of work," Mr. Carter said coldly. David felt a knot form in his stomach. He had been working at this job for years, and he had never caused any trouble. "I was just trying to help the boy," David began. But Mr. Carter cut him off. "That's not the point. David, we have rules for a reason. You need to follow them, or there are consequences." David stood there in silence for a moment. He had always followed the rules, but today, something had been different. That boy was lost, alone, and scared. David couldn't just leave him behind. "Oh, I understand, Mr. Carter. But that boy needed help. I couldn't just leave him there." Mr. Carter sighed, shaking his head. "David, I don't have time for excuses. I've made my decision. You're fired. Effective immediately." The words hit David like a punch to the gut. Fired. After all these years, he couldn't believe it. His mind raced, thinking about his family, the bills, and how he would explain this to Sarah. "But I need this job, please. I was just trying to do the right thing," David pleaded. his voice cracking slightly. Mr. Carter looked at him with no emotion. "I'm sorry, David, but it's done. You can collect your things and leave." David walked out of the office in a daze. Fired for doing something he thought was right. It didn't make sense. He had helped a child. How could that be wrong? But now, he was out of a job, with no idea how he would support his family. That evening, David sat at the kitchen table with Sarah. He told her everything. How he had helped the boy, how his boss didn't care, and how he had lost his job because of it. Sarah sat quietly, her eyes full of concern. "I'm proud of you, David. You did the right thing. Don't let them make you feel like you didn't," Sarah said softly, though David could see the worry in her eyes. "I know, but now what? What are we going to do?" David asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "We'll figure it out. We always do," Sarah replied, reaching across the table to take his hand. Days passed, and David searched tirelessly for a new job, but no matter where he looked, there was nothing available. The weight of his situation grew heavier with each passing day. He began to feel like he had made a mistake, like maybe he should have followed the rules, even if it meant leaving that boy behind. Just as David was beginning to lose hope, something unexpected happened. One morning, as he was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the classified ads in the newspaper, the phone rang. Sarah answered it, and her face immediately changed. "It's for you." "David." "It's the governor's office," she said, her voice full of surprise. David's heart raced. The governor's office? Why would they be calling him? He took the phone, his hands trembling slightly. "Hello, this is David." The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Mr. David, this is Rachel from the governor's office. We've heard about the situation involving the lost child you helped. The governor would like to speak with you personally." David was speechless. The governor wanted to speak with him? David stood there, gripping the phone, his mind racing. He had no idea why the governor's office would want to speak with him. Was this about the lost child? Could they be upset with him too? His thoughts swirled, but he took a deep breath and tried to remain calm. "Yes, I'd be happy to speak with the governor," David replied, his voice steady despite the nervousness building inside him. "Please hold for just a moment," the woman on the other end said. David could hear the soft music playing while he was on hold. He glanced over at Sarah, who was sitting across from him, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. He gave her a small nod, but inside, he wasn't sure what to expect. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a new voice came on the line. It was deep, warm, and full of authority. "Mr. David, this is Governor Mitchell. I wanted to personally thank you for what you did." David was momentarily stunned. The governor was thanking him. I just did what I thought was right, sir." "That's exactly why I'm calling," Governor Mitchell continued. "I heard about what happened, about the boy you helped. Most people wouldn't have gone out of their way the way you did, especially knowing it could cost them their job. But you didn't hesitate. That's the kind of character we need more of in this world." David felt his chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with gratitude. It had been days since he was fired, and he had started to doubt himself. Hearing these words from someone as important as the governor, it meant more than he could put into words. "Thank you, Governor. But I've lost my job because of it. And now, I don't know what's going to happen." There was a pause on the other end, as if the governor was carefully considering his next words. "I understand, Mr. David, and that's why I'm calling, you see. The child you helped, his family is very important to me. In fact, that boy is my nephew. His mother, my sister, had been desperately looking for him that day. She was beside herself with worry. And when she found out you had stepped in to help him, well, let's just say she's forever grateful." David's eyes widened. The boy he had helped was the governor's nephew. He couldn't believe it. What were the chances? I had no idea. I just saw a child who needed help. I couldn't leave him there, David said, still processing everything. And that's exactly why we want to help you. Mr. David, the governor continued. Losing your job for doing the right thing. That's not something I can ignore. My office has spoken with a few people, and I have an offer for you. There's a position in our transportation department, a good one, with better pay than you were getting before. I'd like to offer you that job. You'd be helping oversee the state's public transportation system, making sure things run smoothly. It's a big responsibility. But after what I've heard about you, I'm confident you're the right person for it. David felt his heart race. A new job? Better pay? It was everything he'd been praying for, and more. I don't know what to say, Governor. I'm just overwhelmed, David stammered, his voice filled with emotion. You've earned it, David. This is just a small way of saying thank you for the kindness you showed my nephew. You'll be hearing from my office with all the details soon. Congratulations, and thank you again for everything you've done. David hung up the phone, still in disbelief. He stared at Sarah, who had been listening closely the entire time. What did they say? Sarah asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. David smiled, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. They offered me a new job, in the governor's office, and it's a lot better than driving that bus. Sarah's face lit up with joy. David. That's incredible. I can't believe it. Neither can I, David replied, still in shock. But I guess helping that boy really did change everything. As they sat together in silence, the weight that had been pressing down on them for days slowly began to lift. David couldn't have imagined that such a simple act of kindness would lead to something so life-changing, but it had. And as he thought back to that moment, standing in the rain with the lost boy, he realized that sometimes doing the right thing wasn't about following the rules. It was about following your heart. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for David. After that phone call from the governor's office, everything began to change. True to the governor's word, David received an official offer for his new position in the transportation department. It came with a generous salary, health benefits, and a level of job security that David had never experienced before. David could hardly believe how quickly his life had turned around. Just a few days ago, he had been fired, wondering how he would take care of his family. Now, he was preparing to start a job that offered more than he had ever hoped for. On the first day of his new job, David walked into the state office building with a sense of gratitude that overwhelmed him. As he stepped into the large, glass-covered lobby, he could hardly keep the smile off his face. He had gone from a bus driver to someone working directly for the state, all because he had stopped to help a child. The governor's office had set up an official meeting to welcome David and get him acquainted with his new role. As he sat down in the conference room, he couldn't help but think back to that rainy afternoon, to the boy who had stood alone at the bus stop. It all felt so surreal. During the meeting, David was introduced to a team of people who would be working alongside him. They were warm and welcoming, and many of them already knew about what he had done. "We're lucky to have you with us," David, one of the senior managers, said with a smile. "We've all heard about the kindness you showed to that little boy. You're just the kind of person we need here." David nodded, grateful but still a little stunned by how much attention the story had received. The weeks that followed were full of learning and adapting to his new role. David worked hard, just like he always had. But now, there was a sense of purpose behind everything he did. He wasn't just doing a job to pay the bills. He was part of something bigger. He was helping to improve the very system he had been a part of for so many years. But it wasn't just the job that had changed. There was something different about the way David saw the world now. That single act of kindness had led to a series of events he never could have predicted. It was as if the universe had rewarded him for doing the right thing, even when it had cost him everything at the time. One afternoon, a few weeks into his new role, David received a letter at his office. The envelope was plain, with no return address. He opened it cautiously, curious about what it might contain. Inside was a simple note, handwritten, with only a few words. "Thank you for saving me." David felt his heart skip a beat as he read the words. He immediately knew who it was from. The boy. The one he had helped that rainy day. But there was no signature, no further explanation. Just those few simple words. David sat there, holding the note in his hands. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't thought he would hear from the boy again. But those words carried more weight than he could have imagined. They were a reminder of why he had done what he did, and why it mattered. Later that evening, as David sat with Sarah at home, he told her about the note. She smiled softly, her eyes full of warmth. "You made a difference, David, not just in that boy's life, but in your own. Look at everything that's happened because you chose to help," Sarah said. David nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over him. "I guess you're right. It's strange how one small moment can change so much." Sarah reached out and took his hand. Kindness has a way of coming back to us, sometimes in ways we never expect. David knew she was right. In helping that boy, he had found not just a new job, but a new sense of purpose. A reminder that doing the right thing, even when it seems difficult or costly, can lead to blessings far beyond what we can see. As the days turned into weeks, David began to settle into his new role. Life had taken a complete turn, and the struggles he and Sarah had faced just a short while ago seemed like a distant memory. The financial security that came with his new job meant they could breathe a little easier. And for the first time in a long time, David felt like his family had a future they could look forward to. But it wasn't just about the money. David had found something even more valuable: a renewed sense of self-worth. Every day he woke up knowing he was making a difference. He was helping to shape a transportation system that served millions of people, ensuring that safety and efficiency were priorities. He had gone from being just another bus driver to someone who was responsible for something much bigger. One afternoon, after a long day at work, David received an unexpected visitor at his office. It was a woman, standing at the door, looking slightly nervous. She had a familiar face, but David couldn't place where he had seen her before. "Mr. David?" she asked quietly. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" David replied, curious about why she had come. The woman stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. I'm Jake's mother. The boy you helped that day." David's heart skipped a beat. Jake, the lost child. He had thought about that day so many times, but he had never imagined he would meet Jake's family again. The woman continued, her eyes filling with tears. "I've been wanting to thank you, properly, for what you did, that day. I thought I had lost my son. I was terrified. I'll never forget the kindness you showed him. You didn't just save him, you saved our family." David felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to her. He had only been doing what he thought was right, but hearing her words made him realize just how much that simple act had meant. "I'm just glad I could help. I saw a little boy who needed someone, and I couldn't walk away," David said softly. Jake's mother reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I wanted to give you something, as a thank you, for everything. It's not much, but it's from our family to yours." David hesitated, but the woman insisted, placing the envelope gently in his hands. He opened it slowly, unsure of what to expect. Inside was a check, written out in his name, for a large sum of money, far more than he had ever imagined. David's eyes widened as he looked at the check. I can't accept this," he stammered. "You don't need to do this." The woman smiled through her tears. "You've already given us more than we can repay. Please, let this be a small way for us to show our gratitude. You saved my son's life, and in doing so, you gave me mine back. I want to make sure you and your family are taken care of, just like you took care of Jake." David was overwhelmed. He had never expected anything in return for what he had done. The job, the recognition, it was all more than he had ever hoped for. But now, this generous gift from Jake's family. It felt like the final piece of the puzzle. A true reward for the compassion he had shown. That evening, when David returned home, he sat with Sarah and told her what had happened. As she looked at the check, her eyes filled with disbelief. "David, this is incredible. You've been blessed in so many ways," Sarah said, her voice full of emotion. David nodded, his mind still trying to process everything. "I don't even know how to thank them. But I guess that's not the point. Maybe, sometimes, kindness is enough. The world has a way of bringing it back to you." They sat together in the quiet of their home, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. David's life had been changed in ways he never could have predicted. All because he had stopped to help a lost child. He had lost his job. But in doing so, he had found a new purpose, a new career, and now, an unexpected financial gift that would help secure his family's future. As David looked around at the life he had built, the home he had struggled to keep, the family he loved more than anything, he realized that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the biggest changes. He had no idea that day at the bus stop would lead him here. But he was grateful for every moment of it. And as he sat there reflecting on everything, he knew one thing for sure: when you lead with compassion, when you choose kindness, even when it costs you, the universe has a way of paying it forward, sometimes, in ways you could never imagine. Love this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to Mystic Tales for more. Let us know how this story made you feel with a single word in the comments.